It is true we are having challenges in paying salaries. We are having challenges in giving money to governors because the handshake government ruined this economy. They borrowed money left, right, and center. And because we are a responsible government, we have to pay this money. Last week, some loans had matured, and they have to be paid because we have obligations.
Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua there, explaining the situation in government and the reasons that have led us to where we are. Dr. Mbithi, when you reflect on the situation that pay strike looms in public service is the headline on the Daily Nation, on the Standard, Ruto's big test to fix economy lying in ruins. How best can a government fix this at a time that they still blame game on what the problem could be, yet you have a real situation to deal with 7 months in for an administration?
Yeah, the situation that Kenya is in is not really unique to Kenya. It's something that is unique to other countries of the world, especially because we know after COVID-19, many challenges and in the economy and the picking up, of the economies is one of the key challenges countries are facing. And also other factors are external that are contributing to the economic situation in the country. But how can government fix this? I think one of the key challenges that we see in Kenya today is about the payment of salaries as we know it, and also the payment of debt. One of the key things the government could fix this is to take into account the issue of the wage bill, because that is one of the key challenges. We have so many people that are to be paid at the county level. Mm-hmm. We also have as the national government and the civil service, and that is where really the main challenge comes when it comes to salaries. The civil service is important, mm-hmm. and also the workers at the county government and the work they do is important for any economy to function. But can we afford the number of staff that we have at the moment and the new ones coming in, to expand on that wage bill? So that is one thing that the country could look at, how to reduce or to make sure that we have manageable, for a country like Kenya, mm-hmm. manageable wage bill, both at the county level as well at the national level. The other thing is to support production, because that is critical for any economic recovery. One of the key challenges that we have in production, be it agriculture, be it manufacturing, be it services and any other sector of the economy, is the cost of production and generally the cost of doing business. And that is where one of the key challenges is, because when the cost is high, mm-hmm. then it means we will have the cost is high, we have less investments, and when we have less investments, we have less people getting employment, and that again will trickle to the whole economy. So those are some of the things that government should look at. The cost of doing business, the cost of production, right. Those are critical.
And do you think, because the government has come in and said, the administration rather, that our challenge is the distribution of economic success, and so they're taking it to the bottom of the pyramid, so they say. And they have introduced the Hustler Fund, they've introduced the fertilizer subsidies, taken away the consumption subsidies. Do you think in the short term or in the medium term or in the long run, that will work to ensuring that we're able to reduce the cost of production, but also to ensure that there is more economic success that is shared in the population?
To some extent, it could work in the short run. But maybe the question I would ask is it spread out in the whole country? Is it inclusive? Because if you look at the whole of Kenya, probably we can ask, are the farmers right now accessing that subsidized fertilizer? I'm not sure. But if they access, then that will be very critical in improving their productivity of the agricultural sector, whatever they are producing, and therefore that is important. Reaching to the people that are at the bottom is important, mm-hmm. for inclusiveness. But again, if you look at the Hustlers Fund, which many people can pretty well be able to access, mm-hmm. the question is, again, how much is it, that they're able to achieve? And what can it do for them at a time like this when we know the cost of living is so high? When somebody accesses 500, what does it do? At least it is helping, yes, but and reaching people that need that kind of amount of money. But it is little. Probably in the short run, it can do something. But we will have to move beyond that if we can be able to provide funds that somebody will be able to borrow and be able to invest and contribute to their businesses growing and therefore to the growth of the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm looking at some statistics here. I think it was in the month of March. Out of 15.7 million loans disbursed, 1.8 million are from Nairobi, 1 million Kiambu, Nakuru 793,000, Machako 608, Kakamega 577,000. So you look at that and they appear like more urbanized counties. Former Senators County Mandera had 66,000 borrowers. So I don't know what the challenge could be. So how then do you make it to be widespread so that it benefits as more and more people and business persons as possible?
Yes, I think one of the challenges which could lead to that, why the rural population may not be accessing, is information and technology, because we know we know these funds are accessible through, they are digital. Somebody can access through the phone. And we also know if you go to those rural areas, we have less people, we have more people that are not educated. The good thing is people are able to use mobile phones, even the educated and the ones that are not educated. But to access these funds, somebody in the rural areas who cannot be able to read and write, or to be able to understand English and have a smartphone or whatever phone they can use to access these finances, they'll need assistance. That is possible. But what would be important is if we have more information and also people are advised on, yes, they can seek assistance from people that can assist them access those funds. Right. But again, in the rural areas, you also realize that we do not have lots of businesses. In the urban centers, the people that are borrowing these funds, most of them are doing businesses, whether it's through borders or whether it is through other means of transport or people that are doing small businesses. Okay. So in the rural areas, those opportunities may not be there. So people may not find it so interesting to borrow money, to use it for household consumption. Anyway, it's not been necessary because this is meant to help small businesses. Right. So, and in the rural areas, we find that small businesses are there, but they are limited. So this kind of disparity is likely to continue. But what would be important would be, for me, I would suggest if these limits of funds can be extended, and probably the people in rural areas who wants to borrow a little bit more can be able to borrow that more, and that will be able they'll be able to invest in their businesses. Okay,
all right. Let's listen to what the governors have been saying about the cash crisis in their jurisdictions.
If there is no money, 3-4 months down the line, what do? You have no money, you can't pay salaries, people will put down the tools and they'll walk home.
It's a big problem because to pay China a salary and to borrow. So, and the February now have to recycle again, pay the loan and the borrow, you see.
We rendered services in December for which we had not been given money, January, February, and March.
So far we have not received monies for January, February, and March, almost 96 billion Kenya shillings.
Right. Speaking last is Fernandez Baraza, the governor of Kakamega, and of course he leads the finance team within the Council of Governors. He talks about 96 billion shillings. Dr. Makali Mulu has now been released the first quarter of this calendar year. But also the other governors are also saying that the last resources they received were for December. And I was speaking to the Control of Budget, and she says that actually that money came in last month. So how do you get out of this? Because yes, the explanation, we've had the Deputy President explaining what the situation is, but how do you resolve such kind of issues, yet a governor has a government to run?
Sam, to me, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what we are going through as a country, are we the first country to go through that? as this happened in the past. And if you look at the history of economies in this world, what we are going through is nothing new. Countries have gone through it. What matters and what differs from country to country is how you manage that situation. And I think, to me, what I see, looking at the DP, what he's saying, the issue of a loan has become due and it needs to be paid, salaries have to be, is the issue of planning. Are we really planning well for our cash flows? I'm sure Bill is an accountant, will be able to say it better than me. I'm an economist. The issue of, even in a company, you would be able to project your cash flows. And based on that, plan how you'll be able to pay. You know, this idea of saying the handshake or what, I'm sure during Moi's time, I was not a politician, but being an economist, I can tell you, Kibaki inherited a worse economy than what Ruto has inherited from Uhuru. And Kibaki didn't keep on reminding us that Moi messed up the economy. Kibaki got into serious work. And within 2-3 years, Kenya is good to see there's a new president in town who is actually helping the country. That's what we want to see. These guys have taken over power. They are saying they don't want the servers to be opened, so they are already sitting on that throne. Let them sit and work. Forget about this rear mirror. To me, I get very concerned anytime I see our DP talk. Because the kind of things, this, you know, in the Bible, there's a book of Lamentations. I think time has passed for Lamentations. It's time, this time, Sam, we need serious thinking through how do we get out of this. And I can tell you, if they don't change the planning bit of it, being an economist, we appreciate a lot issue to do the planning. If they don't change it, it's going to be worse. Sam, next year by June, there is the $2 billion Eurobond, which needs to be paid. We don't want to just get there and people are there, we start talking about it when we are there. Currently, economists in this executive should be thinking about how do we generate resources to pay. The other thing is, like, you know what is happening in the counties? You know what is happening is the issue of prioritization of also the cash flows. And I think, Sam, to me, we need to get our priorities right. You know, even as we say we are not able to pay salaries, we are not able to do some of the basic things. Look at the kind of travel we are witnessing with this executive. All over everybody, you look at the ministers, they're all over the world traveling, so many things. There's, to me, I think really, we are not, as a country, we need to sit down and say, in our current situation, what can we deal with? What can we do without? As you remain relevant as a country. And those things we can do without, immediately we start showing signs. You know, I'm sure Dr. Aria will agree with me. In economics, there's a subtopic we do called signaling. I'm telling you, the signals we are seeing from this executive are not going to change this economy. Things are going to get worse. So I wish they were able to listen to some of the, as you say, I watched D yesterday make a presentation, and I could easily pick from the talk that maybe what the council is saying, what they are devising, might not be taken seriously. From just, you know, you don't have to be told, you can read between the lines. I think they might be advising on some of the things need to be done immediately to start turning around the economy, but they're not being listened to. And I think it's important we started listening to some. This is the time to listen actually to economists. Right. Because now, I think the solution now to our problems currently lie more with the economists than the politicians. And when I see my colleagues, the likes of Kimani Ichung'wah, the likes of the majority leader in the Senate, talk, and our own minority leader, I see very small room for economics. I see a lot of room for politics. And if we go that route, I can tell you stuff. You know, at one point, Amanda said, you said I'm a pessimist. I tell you, if they continue that way, next year we'll be talking about a different country. I'm sorry to say it.
Senator Kero, so then, because there's no agreement on what really the problem, the genesis of the problem was, but there's a reality here that you have a debt of 9.2 trillion shillings. I was looking at the medium-term statement from the National Treasury. It talks about 49% of that debt is in foreign currency, 68% of which is in dollar. So there's a big problem and a big challenge ahead of us. But how can the politicians in government fix this, if at all?
Yeah, let me first say what Mheshimiwa said regarding planning. That is the core of our problem in this country. You cannot have a situation where government submits supplementary budget in the middle of March, to adjust their accounts, their payments, and so forth. And 2 weeks later, end of the month, you're not able to pay salaries. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Everything that the government does is budgeted for and appropriated by Parliament. There's no way you can wake up one morning and say, oh, there was a debt we inherited, so we can't pay salaries. Suddenly things are just going south. No, there is a budget. If you went by the budget and you go by the appropriations, and there's no reason why you should be having a situation where you suddenly say, a debt has fallen due. Every public debt has a date when it is due. It's going to mature. You make provisions for it, and it's provided for in the budget. So I think the situation is what I think mentioned even last night. I was just reading in the streets that the problem is the government is, it's not committed to the budget. It is not. There is a lot that happens. And this is what I summarize always in my discussions as misplaced priorities. That's the challenge of this government. You cannot have the president of the country 2 months ago announced that the economy is now stable. That was just in March. Yeah. The economy is now stable. We would have gone, the same deputy president said, we would have gone at the time, like the way Sri Lanka went, if we had not organized things. Then 2 weeks later, you are coming back and saying, oh, sorry, we are in crisis. So I think we are taking Kenyans for a ride in many of these things. Look, the macroeconomic situation will show you clearly things are not rosy. The interest rates have been going up. The exchange rate has gone crazy. Inflation has been going up. The public debt is going up. Every indicator there shows you things are not right. And then you come out and tell Kenyans, the economy, we have stabilized it. We have stabilized. Everything is now perfect. And and look at even some of the fundamentals of this government. Yeah. When is the last time you heard about bottom-up, the word bottom-up being used by politicians in this government? It's months now. It's no longer, the word bottom-ups and hustlers, those things have all now been forgotten. Now we are going into, so the challenge is, yes, we have public debt. But have we stopped? The same newspapers here this morning says in the last 7 months this government has been in power. They have borrowed close to 500 billion. It's here in the papers. I'm not the one who wrote it. I don't know where the figures from, but they said they have borrowed up to. So, and some of the challenge I have is sometimes with media. When government says, like last week, we're going to borrow 57 billion, we are getting support of 57 billion from World Bank to put up 25,000 hotspots. The way there's no World Bank which gives you free money. So when you talk of support, government is going to, the government travels to Korea, it goes to climate talks, and they say we are getting this, we are getting this. These are funds, these are loans. There's no one who's giving you 50 billion for free. Yeah. And so we are borrowing. And then the question really is priorities. It's not the lack of money. KRA has stated clearly it has collected close to 93% of the money that they have collected, that they should have collected. Yes. So the failure by KRA to collect 7 billion is not the reason why we are so pointing fingers at KRA all the time. I think the issue is spending. There is a challenge in government living within its means in this country. And we thought this government is going to address that issue. Unless this government, really the president cracks the whip on the issue of spending, that you spend what you have and you spend as per the priorities and appropriations approved by Parliament. Otherwise, look, the report published by the Controller of Budget just a couple of months ago, the first office that bust its budget by 100% is State House.
The presidency.
By 9 billion. The second office was the Deputy President's office by 2 billion. I mean, how can you lead by example if your office is the first one So unless we really live within, and this is what Keane said, and Ndi was saying last night, government is not bothered about the way they spend, and that's where the challenge is.
Even though the same day was explaining that when a new administration comes in, there's the cost of establishing it, which is attributing now to the resources going to buy cars, to rehabilitate, to refurbish.
I've never lived in State House or any of those big offices, but I would imagine that the vehicles that one president leaves are not in such a dilapidated state that they have to be replaced entirely, or that of the office of the president, or that of a minister. We have been told, I can tell you, there are ministers who have been allocated 12 cars in their ministry. 12 cars, I can tell you. I mean, they are living, I'm telling you, they are not living large. It's just crazy what's happening. You would think this is a government that said we are concerned about the people at the bottom, and so why would a minister? And this is happening, nothing. The situation is getting worse in terms of expenditure in government, and I think that is where our challenge is. It's not the lack of money, it's the way resources are being managed, it's the spending that they need to address.
Right, and Dr. we've spoken to governors here and different stakeholders on matters devolution, and they tell you that when resources are delayed, they can get an overdraft from their commercial bank. It will be free if it's repaid within the month, but if it is not, then it begins to attract interest. What would be the cost of running a government at the county level at a time that you're 3 months late in receiving exchequer releases?
Yeah, that means the costs are much higher, the cost of the money, the overdraft, which they get from the commercial banks, because we also know that commercial banks charge higher interest rates. The average now for average borrowing is around 14%, and that means it will add to the cost of running the county. But more importantly, if we do not have funds at the county level, probably the borrowing will also be limited. The overdraft that they get will be limited to maybe payment of the salaries, but that means then they cannot implement the activities and the ones that are related to development. For example, if it is a support to hospital, if it is support to some roads which are being constructed, they may not borrow money for such activities, but they will pay for probably to keep the officers running. And that means the officers may not be fully engaged to achieve what they wanted to achieve. So again, the cost will be higher for them, and if it pays salaries alone, then we do not get what was intended, the functions of the county government being implemented in full.
And Dr. because counties are required that when they're budgeting, at least 30% has to go to development. 70% goes to recurrent expenditure. And most of them are able to do that, at least on paper. But when it comes to budget implementation, you look at the absorption rates of development budgets, it's pretty poor, and partly because of the lateness of exchequer releases. How then does that affect the rollout of those programs, especially when the money comes either too late in the year, in the financial year, or too early the following financial year at a time that the priorities are already changing?
Yeah, Sam, maybe before I come to that, let me just comment on the issue of the bank overdrafts. The question I want to ask is a bank draft a loan? And I agree it's a loan. The basic principle in financial management is that you should not take a loan to pay recurrent expenditure. So even from the word go, it tells you that's the wrong direction. The other thing is, from what Honorable Bill was saying, the issue of excesses in the government, I think is evident. And actually, if I were the president, lucky enough I'm not, I'll focus more on the expenditure side of the equation. That's all I've put all my efforts, to make sure that we bring expenditures within a level where we are sure we can meet basically the recurrent expenditure. Sam, we might not want to say it, but I can tell you for sure, we are borrowing to meet recurrent expenses in this country, even at the national level. And that's where the problem is. And now that brings the question you're asking, the question of development expenditure. Both at the national level and at the county level, on paper, in terms of budgeting, we would pretend that we are allocating that % of the resources to go to development activities. Truth be said, at the end of the year, when you do your final accounts, you realize that normally development only reaches 15%. Either where donors were funding, that money has not been committed at all, it has not been used. What does that mean? It means we are not growing the cake. So our cake remains the same, but many more people are coming on the table to share it. And that's where you see the problem where we are. Because unless we do development, then we are not likely to talk about the issues of economic growth, the issues of distributive issues relating to many Kenyans accessing resources from the national government. And just take it, like, for example, when you send money to the counties and they are doing a road from point A to B, Sam, if you are to do an analysis of what we call the trickle-down effects of that road, how many people benefit from that road, and the impact of that one road to the local economy, you realize that what you lose when you don't do that road.
Right.
And that's what is happening. We do budget for water projects, we do budget for roads, we budget for health sector projects, but we don't implement them. Which means then, even though we are claiming we are triggering a lot of activity at the bottom, there's minimal. People are being paid salaries, if I told they will be paid, to sit in offices. Because if you earn your salary, you don't go out to supervise a road. If you earn your salary, you don't go out to do extension work so that agriculture can improve. Basically, then you are being paid aside to sit in the office. And in terms of, from where I sit as an economist, that will not help this economy grow. So we want to see a strict adherence to that rule of thumb, that as much as possible, let that % of our budgets go to development. Because the person who decided that, and it is in our act actually, it is in the Public Finance Management Act, the person who, the wisdom behind that statement, that push forward development 30% and push 70% to recurrent, must have gone through a lot of research for people to get to those ratios. Right. So anytime you interfere with those ratios, it means something is not working well somewhere. So for me, I want to say, let's really get money to do development. And you know, the other thing we are not saying is, when these overdrafts are taken by county governments, at the end of the day, the money we allocate them, there will be some financing gap, because interest is not factored in the budget. So there will be a financing gap. What happens? Either their locally generated revenue will meet that gap, or then you find that at the end of the day, they will not be able to meet their recurrent expenditure because some of that money will have now been reallocated to meet the bank overdrafts. And you know, at times you do take bank overdrafts. Even me, I take. Those overdrafts are expensive, sir. They are not cheap. They are expensive. So let's avoid them as much as we can. And that will happen if we do a proper cash flow management. You know, as we said, anytime you do a budget, you do your procurement plans for the year, you do your cash flow plans, and I think really what we are not getting right is how to use the money we are, because you collect money on monthly basis as a country, how then we allocate that money, and then the underlying line is allocating money to key priorities of the nation. Thank you, Sam.
All right, and I also want us to listen to the Governor Muthomi Njuki, who was also speaking about the challenges they're having to deal with in the counties.
At the moment, counties, we are on our knees because we are not only missing money to pay salaries for health workers, we are also missing money to buy commodities and also be able to support systems that support health.
You served in the Senate and you had an experience with the counties. Looking at what they were telling you, the governors were telling you at that time versus now, are we getting better? Because there's been this clarion call that counties need to increase their own source revenue. But if the economies are not expanding in the counties, even if they improve their ways of collecting that money, there may be nothing to collect. How then do we get out of this confusion?
Yes, I think there's an issue that is always being misrepresented. This issue of own source revenue by the county governments. The Constitution is very clear. No authority except Parliament can legislate for taxation in this country. Absolutely. So county governments have no powers to collect any taxes except rates and levies for the services that they offer. So if your county is Kitui, I mean, the kind of levies they can collect really for services that they offer would be very limited. The reason is, so what we said when we were drafting this constitution is that, look, all our revenues will be collected at national level and then shared out equitably. That's the bottom line. So our resources, when you are in Kitui and you are doing business, your little shop there with Mama Mboga selling water and so forth, there is VAT on it. All is being collected in Nairobi by KRA. So everything is centralized so that it can be shared out equitably. And the constitution says clearly the national government has to deliver that money without delay. In other words, there is a schedule of disbursements approved by the Senate every year, which clearly sets out by what date. And this is an obligation, just like the obligation for debt, just like the obligation to pay, you know, other pension funds and, you know, obligations and so forth. So this is something that Treasury always ignores. Even this week when they're talking, I see the CS talking about, you know, those preferential payments that they have to make with regards to debt obligations and you know, and pensions and so forth, but it doesn't mention counties also. So what is happening is that the first counties, I think, leadership, 2013, 2017, those people were powerful. Those people were powerful and they really were independent to an extent where they were holding Treasury to account regarding their money. And they had gone to court, I remember, several times. I was the chairman of the Senate in the Finance Committee at the time, and I know. But, you know, today, where is the Council of Governors? They're part of government. You cannot be sitting and dining with them in the morning, and then in the afternoon you give a very muted, you know, statement. You know, our money has delayed. You can't work like that. This is a government that Kenyans asked for in every county, because of the same reason that we are the problem we're finding today. Treasury had centralized resources to the point that development was based on political patronage. Some parts of this country were not getting resources, they are not getting development. And Kenyans said, we want devolution. Everybody should get his piece of money and run his own things, you know, democracy at the grassroots level. That was the essence. So I think in my view, yes, the Council of Governors themselves need to really up their game and put pressure on government that, you know, they should not be waiting 4 months and complaining, you know, the way other ordinary folks complain that they have not got money.
Right. And getting back to the question of public debt, Dr. Mbithi, because if you look at it lately, they're almost at 50-50. That is domestic debt versus external debt. In terms of financing a deficit, close to maybe 60 or 70% is actually domestic versus the external. But also very expensive. Like he says, Eurobond repayment schedule for next year. Then you have the impact of Forex, the foreign exchange rates. Is there a way? I know the ceiling is 10 trillion shillings. If now we're at 9.2, we have just about a year to hit it. Is there a way of reorganizing that?
The best thing we can do, I mean, to reorganize that, we have to look at two ways. One is the revenue that can be corrected so that we have more money to be able to pay the debt, or we reduce our expenses as a country so that we have more money remaining. And that means if we have more money remaining from what we've collected, then we can be able to pay for that amount of money for the debt. So the most easy way or most probable way is for government to look at these costs, the excess costs, and cut them down. Those costs that we can do without as a country, we can reduce them. And if we reduce those costs, including the high wage bill and whatever else, whatever other costs which may not be of priority now, if we reduce those costs, then we'll be able to have some money out of the total revenue that the government is able to collect. Because the total revenue which the country can collect is already estimated by the National Treasury. We know how much is expected. We may not be able to collect much more than that, but if our expenditures go down, then we will have more money, which means we can be able to use to pay our debts. So the quickest would be, you know, reducing our expenses as a country.
But when that debt, 49% is based on, is in foreign currency.
Yes.
A huge chunk being in dollar, and you've seen what is happening, the fluctuations. Are there ways of either fixing the dollar rate, or, I don't know, how do you do it?
When you talk about fixing, the exchange rate system that we have in Kenya is the one that is a free or floating exchange rate. So the government is not fixing. That is the policy that we have, the monetary policy that we have. So because the central bank doesn't fix the exchange rate, it is free, it can fluctuate depending on the currency and the time. So I don't think that will be a possible way. And especially given that if you look at dollar all over the world, we know that all the currencies have been depreciating. So there's not much that can be done with regards to fixing, unless the central bank changes the policy. And because it's a free and fluctuating kind of policy, I don't think that is one of the options that we have.
Okay. I don't agree with this. You see, central bank has been fixing the exchange rate for the last 2 years. This is why we have a dollar shortage. I'm in business and I know. And we have talked about this thing for the last 2 years. In fact, if there is anyone who has screwed up the economy of this country, is the central bank government. Frankly. Because when you don't have dollars, what is happening is that people then start looking for, it's in short supply, then the rate goes up. Today we have two rates. There's an official one that the government says is the official rate. It's been at, when it is at 122, the unofficial in the bank, if you go and buy, you're charged 130. The official one had gone even up to 140, 145. They'll tell you the official one is at 120 something, 130. The reason is because the central bank has been trying to protect government because of the external debt. You see, when you have $40 billion in external debt, every shilling then the value increases by 40 billion. And because of the protecting government, they have made the cost of living worse in this country. Because we are now buying, all businesses, if you're an importer, and you're looking for hundreds of thousands of dollars, or millions, those are companies looking for millions of dollars. I mean, they're buying at 140, 139, 140, it even went up to 145. And then central bank tells you, no, the official rate is 128, 130, just because they want to keep the exchange rate low. But that effect is making the cost of goods very expensive, because everybody has to buy at a very expensive, there's no dollars. Central bank has mentioned many times that the money is there in the country, but exporters don't want to release it, because why do I, as an exporter, let my money be sold to a bank at 129 when tomorrow, if I need it, I'll be forced to buy at 140? So this dual exchange rate policy that central bank has put in place has really had a very adverse effect on the economy. What they need to do is, this thing, let's avoid this dual exchange. Let us have free, the way the policy is. What will happen is, initially there will be a jump. Government debt will go up, but dollar availability shortage will disappear. Dollar will be available. And I'm telling you that availability will make things easy, businesses easy. Today, many businesses are struggling to get dollars. We spend a lot of time trying to get dollars from banks.
So how do the banks fix that rate?
It's not the banks, it's the central bank. Banks are required by central bank to buy at the rate that they publish as the official central bank rate. You cannot as a bank. So if I am an exporter and I have $100,000 in my account, I can only sell it to the bank, my commercial bank, at the rate which central bank published, which is at 129, 130. But if I want to now, as a businessman, tomorrow buy for my import, and from the same bank will sell it to me at 140. And we have seen how banks have made billions of shillings in the last 2 years.
That's what I'm asking. How
and the spread, has gone.
The
huge spread.
How do they fix that selling price themselves as the commercial banks?
They have, well, for them it is demand.
Demand and supply.
I mean, it's demand and supply. So, central bank has allowed them, as far as selling is concerned, do what you want. But when you're buying, stick to this. So this is the duplicity that the government, and the government knows this is happening. And we have talked about it. They have talked about the huge spread between what officially, the banks are buying at and what you have to buy at. And this is hurting the economy. I think, look, public debt is with us. There's nothing you can do about it. But I think you cannot also mess up other parts of the economy because of, and the reason, of course, is, you know, Mheshimiwa, our exports have been dwindling. This is one part of the reason she mentioned, which is global. Our exports have been going down. There's no tourism since Corona started. You know, the tourism has gone down significantly. The economy, the depressed economies in Europe also means less of our exports, particularly in horticulture and tea and all those things. So the inflow is very limited. At the same time, the imports have really gone up because you know, the prices of oil, of food, and all other things we're importing, everything, metal, everything has gone up globally, you know, and so we're paying twice as much today to import the same quantity of goods as we were in 2019. And so the demand for dollar is partly created also by that. So this is, but it's not only every country. You go to Uganda here, the shilling is doing very well. Go to Tanzania, it's doing very well. Ours is because of the debt and because of what the central bank has done. But the debt issue, let me tell you, is not because we don't have resources. We are collecting more money than all these other 5 countries in East Africa put together. Combined. But when it comes to spending, we are a disaster. And that's where our problem is.
Maybe okay. Sam, if I were to just weigh in on this matter of the dollar, the exchange rate, I think there are 2 scenarios to it. For example, if you look at the foreign reserves, I think rule of the thumb is that we expect to have at least 4 months of imports. If you look at that indicator, you realize you're already below 4 months. And that's why I agree with my colleagues. The issue of the dollar and the floating exchange rate is a big concern. Just to share figures, if you look at 2021-2022 financial year, we are now 2022-23, yes. 2021-2022 financial year. Just as a result of the changing foreign exchange rate, in terms of repayment of loans, the country spent over 5 billion just as a result of that change. For the first 6 months up to December, if you look at the report of the control of budgets, and the Auditor General, we also spent another about 2.6 billion for 6 months, just as a result of that change. But there's another angle to this issue of public debt, which we hardly discuss as Kenyans. Can you believe it, Sam, that in this country, there are loans we have signed before as a country, and because we don't withdraw any money from those loans, which we have signed before, we are paying commitment fee in millions of shillings. So the issue of our own, I don't know what to call it now, a situation where you sign for a loan, and you don't draw the resources, and then every year you are paying over almost up to about, for example now, the last time we checked, we're actually paying about over 500 million in terms of commitment fee for loans signed before, which the country is not using. So to me, these are some of the things we should not even be talking as a country, because this money could be directed to other private areas like health and education. At any time you interact with the Treasury people, we ask them, why should we continue paying this? Because I'm sure, you know, any loan contract, there is always a clause for either you renegotiate or you cancel the loan. There could be some consequences, but I think you would rather better do either you renegotiate that I can't withdraw these resources, so either push for allow the other people to take them, or say cancel them. Because it becomes very, very expensive to the country. And to me, I just see them as bad manners in terms of financial management. What I would call just bad manners. And other than just complaining always, these are things I think, these are the quick wins we could actually get into and help this country. Right. But I thought it's important I say that, Sam. Okay. Yeah.
Let's hear the voice of the chairman of the Budget Committee on the debt management strategy.
In the next financial year, we want our deficit to come down to below 5%. And therefore, we are in the right trajectory. However, this also comes with a lot of ramifications, because as you know, when our debt portfolio is 50-50 foreign and domestic, that means more than 4.5 trillion Kenya shillings is foreign debt. I am hopeful that that tide will turn, and I want to assure all the other people who could be in the same situation, many Kenyans who could be waiting for the salaries to hit their accounts, that we already started paying last week, and hopefully by the end of this Easter week that we are starting, that will be a thing of the past.
So, Dr. Mbithi, you're the economist here, and we hear this language, very, very heavy terms, debt management strategy. A Kenyan may wonder, what are these people talking about? But what does it take for Kenyans now to start feeling it is easing off? The times are getting better.
Yeah, first, if you look at the debt service to the revenue ratio in Kenya, it's very high. It's over 55%. And for us to start feeling any difference, okay, first of all, when we have the service ratio being 55%, it means that most of the money that we are collecting as a country is going to pay the debt. 55% should be going to service that debt. Mm-hmm. What is remaining is 45%. Now, this 45% is the one that government has to use in all its obligations, be it sending to the counties, be it at the national level, and so on. So long as we are there at that point, then it means we still have challenges, and we feel it. We will still continue seeing money is not going to the counties, and salaries are being delayed. Some people have not been paid, which of course we have said will have negative impacts on the economy. So one of the things that we need to do, and which we've been talking about here, is the country is collecting revenue up to today. What we need to do is to reduce the deficit, which we've just had on the clip that you showed, mm-hmm. so that our deficit, which is the difference between what we've collected and our expenses, what we need to do, we need to reduce that. And if we reduce the expenditures, then it means we are narrowing that gap. We have more money, and when we have more money to meet our obligations, which also include the payment of the debt, as well as the other planned activities that the government wants to engage in, then that will be a great thing.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to Ndii last night, and he was saying that the government is just part of the economy. It is not the economy. So that separation, so that, yes, you can run the government, but the economy is worth, is it about 13 trillion shillings now, the entire economy? Mm-hmm. How do Kenyans start feeling that differentiation so that you don't feel like there's so much going on in government that you even have to be so careful even how you spend your resources? Is it a question of time? Is it a question of understanding? What is it?
I think it's both. It's a question of understanding and more so a question of time, because for people to feel that there's a change in the economy, they must have some income. They must be able to meet their needs. They must be able to meet their demand in all the sectors, whether it's at the household level, whether it is to do with education, to do with health. When people are able to have money, that they can be able to meet all their needs, that is when they start feeling there's a change. The economic activities, in a way, they touch on the government. So I don't totally agree that there's government on one side and the economy on the other side, because government, for larger part, controls the institutions and oversees the running of the institutions that impact on the economy and the economic activities. And these economic activities are the ones that also impact on everybody. For example, people getting services from government offices, and also government implementing some investments that impact on production and the lives of people. So in my view, I feel that for people to feel that there's a change in the economy, government also needs to take an action, and we find this will trickle down and impact on the economic activities that people engage in.
Okay. Senator Kero, what are your thoughts about the new strategy by government to finance public projects, moving away from debt to public-private partnership? Will it help us? And what is that obligation? Because, for instance, the Nairobi Expressway, we have to continue financing it through the toll fees that we pay for a long period of time. Is it the better route to avoiding public debt?
Yeah. I think the public-private partnership, let me say at the outset, that there is no investor who gives you free money. When an investor, whether it is through public-private partnership or whatever, an investor is coming in order to make money on that project. So at the end of the day, taxpayer has to pay money for that money. That money has to be paid, whether it's PPP or whether it's a loan or whatever. That money, there's nothing called government money. Every shilling that you see government paying to someone, it's money that means you will pay as taxes. But the advantage then is the PPP gives the government at least some alternative to borrowing. Because what happens with most of the PPPs is you design the project, you build it, you operate it, and you get your, recoup your money and make your profit on it over a certain period of time. So as long as the government officers, and this is where the challenge is in this country and many of the third world countries, where as long as the government officials who are involved in those PPP contracts, agreements, do it with integrity and with patriotism and with the interest, of the country, and you look at the interest, then I think it's good business. But when the PPPs are done, to the interest of the investor, then I can assure you the burden will still be with you. One way or the other, sooner rather than later, the burden will be on us. But PPP is a very important policy that the government has. Building of houses, prisons, police, so many things can be done actually through PPP. The people are ready to put in their money and get their money from either from the government or from providing that service for a period of time. It happens in many countries. It's not only Kenya. Even in developed countries, there are toll roads that you can that are put up by investors in that kind of arrangement. But that is the key thing, that and we have a law that guides that. And I think as long as these things are done with integrity and the Parliament does its role of oversight, PPP is a very useful way of limiting the borrowing.
And Dr. Makali, the other alternative that I've seen is the government-to-government deals. For instance, there's an oil deal that is to run, is it about 9 months, starting this April? And there's been complaints that some of the oil marketing companies are dissatisfied because there's been handpicking of who will be importing that oil from, is it Saudi and UAE? What are your thoughts about that at a time that now you have an area that was almost open tender system, now is being controlled by government to government of such a strategic commodity?
What I would say is government to government arrangement in terms of what we call government bureaucracy is very good because it reduces all that bureaucracy in terms of procurement procedure and all that. So to some extent, it facilitates the process. But the problem is matters accountability and openness. And that's why you see the people negotiating for those deals are mostly government officials. And from what Bill was saying, in a situation where people go to those tables with the public interest tag and not personal tag, I think the government is likely to benefit. But unfortunately, many a time, you find that people who go to those negotiations also do provide for that, what I call private interest. And that's why the deal becomes very complicated. So the reason why you see people are complaining because the openness you would get if you went through an open procurement process, you would not get it on a government-to-government arrangement. So if there was a way to open it up so that people, through the public participation, so that those who are concerned can have their input, and the same with the PPP, that the fact that people have information on what has happened. The challenge we have is there's a lot of secrecy around these issues, where the government-to-government or public-private partnerships. But some, just for information, in Parliament, a new committee has been created. We have now a new committee called Public Debt and Privatization Committee. And actually, up to now, the committee has tabled 2 reports. How I wish we could interest Kenyans too, because those are public reports, to read those reports. What this committee is doing is now looking into details, matters public debt, privatization, and issues of consolidated fund services.
Right.
So they're doing a very detailed report, and I just want Kenyans to have a look at those reports. For the first time, we are getting a lot of insights into what is happening. And I want to refer that to the matter of my chair budget, what Honorable Ndindi was saying, about the issue of reducing the budget deficit to, now we are at 5.7, they intend to this year to come to 4.8, but in the medium term to go to 3.4. The challenge we have is we have always been having these figures, but when it comes to actual budget implementation, you find at the end of the day, we don't realize those projected budget deficit figures. And that's basically because of the issue of the expenditure. Right. We end up spending more than you had projected. But all said and done, I think the issue of public debt remains a issue of key concern in this country. It's an issue if we want really to move forward, we have to think about other alternatives of funding our budget. And that's why I like the issue of the PPP, because that's like out of budget implementation projects. And we would want to encourage many sectors to go that way, so long as there's openness and accountability, the way we do it. Because when you look at the express highway, some of the issues have been raised by Kenyans always. Is Kenyans don't know how much it costed the developer, and they don't know how much government has spent in terms of facilitating that development. Right. How I wish we had all those figures on the table. It will make things very easy. People will see this helping the country. The other good thing is we get money from out there, come do development in our country, and with the time, this development reverts back to the government. Right. So it becomes public, we're good.
And just back to that question of government to government, is there any framework of Parliament to oversight it? Because it's not covered.
No, there is actually that's why I've not seen anything coming to Parliament for that debate, unless it's at the departmental committee. I've never seen a parliamentary report being tabled in Parliament relating to government interaction.
All right.
Yes.
I want us to close, but Senator Kero, what are the risks? Because you have spoken to the question of integrity when it comes to public-private partnership. Then the question of government to government. I mean, what are the risks? Because if even Parliament, there's no law that tells you that this is how it's supposed to be managed, because it's actually excluded from the Public Procurement Assets Disposal Act.
No, there's no exclusion. The government should have followed the requirements of the Public Procurement Act in, for example, determining which entity, which company will be taking the petroleum products from those three companies in UAE and Saudi Arabia. It ought to have done that, and this is why someone went to court, and this is why petroleum companies were complaining. The second thing is that even globally, government to government is not a new thing. This government, even at the time of Kibaki, I remember, government to government, Kenyan government has always had these arrangements with Nigeria, with this country, with that country, and those government to government deals are then sold off. We have not seen a situation where they have, in terms of petrol, you know, given us that benefit. And so I think this is one of those ones where this thing is not done with the interest of Kenya at heart. That I can tell you for a fact. I was in petroleum business for a long time. And the open tender system that the ministry was running for the last 20 years or so was a very efficient one, very transparent, you know, and so when the government now gave the reason for this government-to-government thing as the foreign exchange. But you know, I always say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We'll see. We're going to kick off this month or next month, whether it will be, because you're having a situation where all the marketers used to aggregate their demand, and then the tender is done by the ministry and the import is done. And it was all very transparent and everything was very clear. Now we have a situation where those three countries from the Gulf, three companies from the Gulf will supply one company in Kenya, and that company sells to these other ones. And so the pricing, the way these things will be done is going to be a very critical thing. Now this is where petroleum companies are concerned. At what price this entity that will be appointed by the government will sell to them at? You know, and so you see, petroleum is generally a product which is available in the commodity markets. You open your Reuters, you know what the petroleum price is. So there isn't an awful lot of discount you'll get even in government to government. That's not something you would really expect in something like petroleum. But nonetheless, I think the reason they argued was about the dollar, and that this credit of 9 months would give them breathing space. One, we want to see what will be the impact on the dollar shortage and the dollar price. And two, we will wait to see how the program itself will be run out, and will not hopefully give us another problem in terms of the supply of petroleum products or even the pricing.
Right. And Senator, I was referring to Section 4 of the Public Procurement Asset Disposal Act that states about the application of the Act, and says, subsection 2, for avoidance of doubt, the following are not procurements or asset disposals with respect to which this Act applies. And paragraph F says, procurement and disposal of assets under bilateral or multilateral agreements between the government of Kenya and any other foreign government, agency, entity, or multilateral agency, unless as otherwise prescribed in the regulations.
That's true. Yeah. That's government to government. This is not government to government. ADNOC is not government, and Aramco is not government. These are the private entities. They belong to various governments in those countries. They are major shareholders, but they are not government entity. There is not government to government in the sense that the government of Saudi is giving us fuel.
Okay.
No, you are not having a. There's no arrangement of government to government in that sense. We have a situation where 3 companies have been identified in the Gulf that will provide fuel, and you know. So I think it's not strictly in the bilateral. Those other arrangements, like these arrangements you've seen with companies that provide governments that provide money to build a road, Ngong Road, and then it's a bilateral arrangement. They say, okay, World Bank, ADB, all of them come up with their own arrangements on who will be the contractor, how that project will be done, and so forth. But those are institutions that, or governments, bilateral government. But this is not strictly a government, because I think that is one of the questions that has been raised. How do they, settle on those 3 companies? And there are many companies that are petroleum owned. I mean, petroleum business, which are owned by governments in other parts of the world.
All right, let's take a look at the feedback that has come to us via Citizen TV Kenya. Sam Gichuku, the hashtag to use is a daybreak on the conversations this morning. We begin with who? Godi Baraza. The current administration should by all means opt for austerity measures that will navigate us back to the economic wellness. It will be so ironic for the same administration to spend unnecessarily in the wake of this financial crisis. Engineer Lazaro, bipartisan approach talks should be widened to discuss cycles of post-election violence, winner takes it all, sick economy, and endless blame game being played by both sides. Bob Otieno, Azimio Kenya is taking advantage of the problems we are facing today, barely 6 months after Kenya Kwanza took over power. They should give them time to fix our economy, as it needs a long-time project, not a Mr. Quick Fix thing. Engineer Lazaro again, it's now more than 6 months since Ruto administration took over office. For now, how long will they be talking about the past regime? Kenyans are sick and tired of blame games. Let them be men enough to discuss their own manifesto. Whoa, okay. Said, you're saying that Treasury CS Njuguna Ndung'u comments are giving Kenyans the same feeling as a flight attendant freaking out passengers. Scary. Tough times ahead. Tighten your belts and prepare for a bumpy ride. Whoa. Okay. Honorable Lilian CEO, you say that it's evident that the Kenya Kwanza administration assumed the leadership of this nation with its financial state in the red. This is the time where all players need to put their hands on deck in a bid to safeguard our economy going forward. And Babu Michael, the truth is that the same people complaining about debt levels and struggles are the same people who raised the debt level this high. And when most people complained, they said it will be manageable. Let them manage it now. All the best. And Leonardo, if we reach a point where the government prioritizes settling debts rather than the life of the citizens, then we are in a serious crisis. I mean, this Kenya Kwanza is constantly blaming previous regime, which most of us consider having done a good job. It should stop the blame game. That's what Kenyans are saying this morning. And Okello Mwalimu is saying that before taking dangerous route of delaying payments to public servants, government should consider viable austerity measures, for instance, buying low fuel consumption cars, repair of stalled government vehicles, and reducing domestic and foreign trips. Who will provide services if servants go on strike? The pertinent questions that our viewers are raising this morning, and I want to thank you gentleman and lady, for making time for us. Dr. Makali Mulu from Kitui Central, Dr. Mary Mbithi from the University of Nairobi, and Bilo Kero, former senator, but also quite conversant with matters, politics and economy. Thank you all for making time for us of this conversation. My name is Sam Gituku. See you some other time. Bye for now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.